I've got something to say.
I got something to say.
No, Glenn, not that. Not this time. I've got a bit of a confession to make. It wasn't an Out Come the Wolves, Milo Goes to College, or Punk in Drublic that changed my life forever. No. It was none of those. It was a compilation album.
What the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm not lying. It was a compilation album, specifically the Warped Tour 2001 comp. Now there's a deep cut for you. Try to find someone else on YouTube that's going to be talking about the Warped 01 comp. But why am I talking about it? Why should we care? It's a random collection of songs that aren't even that well known by hardcore fans of these bands. So why does this album mean so much to me? Well, from a personal standpoint, this album and a lot of other comps, they really resonated with me. They were like a nice gateway into the world of punk rock. Whether it was the Warped Tour compilations, the Punk-O-Ramas, Fat Music for Fat People, Short Music for Short People, the Hopelessly Devoted to You series, Punk Rock Is Your Friend from Kung Fu, it doesn't matter. These comps were huge. I would say back in the day, compilation albums, especially on the punk rock side, they were kind of like radio play for punk bands. You know what I mean is maybe you lived in an awesome place where you had something like K-Rock that would play some of this punk and pop punk. But I think for most of the country, you really didn't get a chance to hear these artists. Really, if you think about it, back then, the distribution avenues were just so much smaller. You probably had to see a band in a support act at a show, and maybe you would catch them, you would like them. You would get turned on by some cover art in one of the inserts of another album you already bought, or maybe one of the bands would be shouted out in an interview in a magazine. Either way, it was just hard to hear new stuff, to know what you like or what you might want to be further exposed to. And that's where the comps came in. The comps were great at that. I think with comps, there was a simple formula. There's a brand name there, whether it is the label, the event, or some of the bigger bands. You know, if you see a comp that has like No Effects or Bad Religion on it, you know, it's probably going to be pretty good. There's probably going to be some stuff that's pretty like-minded. And yeah, you get that comp for maybe that song by that band you really, really like or are into or want to find this rare version of the song. But what you end up doing, you end up discovering a whole new world of music. Now, this is really great for labels to brand themselves. I mean, back in the day, it's probably impossible to own every release by Hellcat Records. But if you had one of the Give 'Em the Boot comps, you kind of had a sense of the flavor of each band that was on the label. And most importantly, this didn't cost a lot of money. So if you only had a couple bucks to spare, this was a great way to get new music on a fairly regular basis. Now, everything I just said, it's mostly true about the Warped Tour comps, but there's a few little differences. The Warped Tour comps, they were produced by Joe Sibb's Side One Dummy label. So it was a record label promoting its own interests. But the stuff on the comps was from all over the place. It was from the Warped Tour bands. It was a hodgepodge of everything from the most bubblegummy pop punk to the most hardcore street punk to even some hip hop and pop mixed in there. The Warped Tour comps were not a sampler of the flavor of a certain label. They were a sampler, quite literally, of what you were going to see on that summer's Warped Tour. Now, in the coming months, I actually plan to make a lot of videos that focus on the Warped Tour and its legacy. But for now, we'll just talk about the CD that always preceded the Warped Tour. Warped Tour lineups, they were always like a cross-section in time. Like, if you go back to any specific year, you could kind of get a flavor of what was happening during that year, or at least during that summer. But back when information was a little bit slower, you weren't always hip to like what the Warped Tour lineup was gonna be that summer. Now, I'm not sure which came first. I think usually the lineups and the dates were released before the comp came out. But back then, information just flowed a whole lot slower, and you didn't know everything about, well, everything. So for a lot of people, this was their introduction to what the Warped Tour was gonna be that year. Now, the release in 2000 wasn't the first time the Warped Tour had put together a compilation CD, but it really was the first in this series that lasted all the way to 2016 that was really in this specific type of, well, format. And every year it kind of varied on what the artists were going to provide for these comps. And that's kind of the trick of comps, right? What theme are you going with? Is it just repurposed songs that people already own? Or are they new and rare songs that nobody's ever heard? The Warped Tour CDs were a little bit of a mix of both, but the comp in '01 was a lot of rarities. And that's pretty awesome, especially when you think of some of the bigger bands that were on these comps. You probably only had ever heard their MTV or radio hit. This was a chance to dive a little deeper into the band before you made the big decision of, actually purchasing a CD. Yep, that was a thing we did back in the day. We went to the store, we maybe had heard one song, and we spent money.
I'm not a kid anymore, I'm getting old. Yeah. I know I'm getting old. Well, my last birthday cake looked like a prairie fire.
Now I'm having trouble in my mind actually remembering where it was that I purchased the '01 Warped Tour comp. I mean, what relic of the past did I purchase it at? Was it FYE? Was it a Hastings? Was it a Sam Goody? Was it a Circuit City? Nah. I don't think so. I was hardcore back in the day. I had street cred. I bought it at Hot Topic. I think I did. Maybe I didn't, but I'm going to say I did. Like in the back of Hot Topic where you had all the CDs and you could press the button and put on the headphones and listen to them for a few seconds. Kind of missed that. But anyway, yeah, I think I probably got it from there. I used to get comps from Hot Topic a lot, actually, because like I said, they were cheap. And hey, I needed to save my budget for, the pins at the front or a Blink-182 shirt. Definitely needed one of those in 2001. Anyway, back to my story of getting this CD. See, back in the summer of 2001, I knew punk rock was something, and I knew it was something I wanted to get into. But like most people that are 13 or 14, whatever I was back then, it's kind of hard to find an entry point, especially if you live in an area that doesn't actually have a punk scene. Like nobody I knew had ever even really heard of punk rock, or if they did hear of punk rock, it was just kind of an umbrella term for them. They'd really want to know specifically what it is that you were referring to. And like I said, at this time, things were kind of percolating for me. I had an idea of what punk rock was, and I had some of the bigger pop punk releases of the day. I had the Blink CDs, I had some stuff by Green Day, The Offspring, Sum 41 had just came out. So I had a sense of what it was, and the little bit of radio airplay that it did get, I really liked, but I wanted to get deeper into it. And when I saw the Warped Tour comp, I knew that there was more that I would appreciate here. I had heard of some of these bands, but I really didn't know anything about them. Let's just say this CD changed everything for me.
That's bullshit.
I've spoken in the past how I feel Rancid is the greatest punk band that's ever lived. Maybe my personal favorite. One or two bands, them and the Ramones. It's really a toss-up. Not very important to who my favorite band is. But when I think about that, it's not surprising that they had the first song on this comp. They had Sick Sick World. And I heard that, and I knew something was different. I've never been able to describe what it is about punk rock in this way. It's heavier than anything you've ever listened to, but it's also more melodic than anything you've ever listened to, and it's not as heavy as the heavy metal you're listening to, even though it's heavier. That makes sense. Trust me, it makes sense.
That doesn't make sense.
Anyway, again, not shocked that Rancid was on this thing, and kind of started this 20-year love affair that I'm still very, very much involved in. Beyond that, what was great about these comps is the mixture of various strains of, well, pop punk. You have stuff like Rancid and the Bouncing Souls, followed by freaking New Found Glory. And this is right before New Found Glory had really blew up in 2002. Yeah, they were big and people knew of them, but they were still in their infancy. And the song, like so many ways, it was such a great representation of them. There must be so many ways to say goodbye. Anti-Flag, never heard of them. Heard of them on this comp. Same thing with AFI. I knew of them. I think I knew Total Mortal maybe from the Offspring's version, but this was a gateway into them. Same goes for Midtown and the Vandals. And I guarantee you this is the first spot I ever heard Flogging Molly. And just look at this 4-song run towards the middle to end of the album. You've got Tsunami Bomb, the Ataris, No Use for a Name, Kill Your Idols, and the Casualties. All right next to each other. They all kind of belong together. And we belong together. And as I mentioned, I listened to all of this all the time, front to back. And I think having these comps and having this comp specifically actually shaped my perception of what actually constituted punk rock. And it's grown over the years. There was a time where I did have that kind of elitist attitude that I think a lot of people have, where it's like, no, this is my punk rock, this is punk rock, this isn't punk rock. You have the wrong chord progression there, your voice is too high pitch over there, that's not punk rock. But that was a little bit of a jaded time, and I've grown out of that. And initially, I really liked it all. And it's not surprising, because as I think about it more, the comps and Warped Tour itself really shaped my musical interest. It was such a influence. And I'm sure I'm not the only kid that was the case on. Because, you know, especially, again, if you live a little more remotely, you're not siloed into a scene. Everything is a scene. There is no scene.
Now, I just want you to know that it's a perfectly normal thing.
And that's what Warped Tour was. Warped Tour was like the compilation album of live shows. It was all the bands you think you kind of like, all jammed into a micro-sized version of what they actually produce. And the music world is better for it. So yes, I guess I'm being a little bit exaggerating when I say that this album changed my life, but maybe not. Maybe it was super important. And I think comps are important. And they're not really relevant in today's landscape because you can just find what you need, and algorithms have kind of done what comps used to do. So I thought I would just do this quick video and reflect on what they meant to me personally. I know this video was a little bit different and not as in-depth of a historical record as some of the other stuff I have on my channel. Please go watch any of that other stuff. But I just wanted to express how important this little cheap CD was on my overall development as a punk rock fan. Talk to you next time.